The crossover between Invincible and the Astounding Wolfman comics was an exciting and intriguing storyline. It explores the complex relationships between these characters and the consequences of their actions, which lead to a misunderstanding between Invincible and the Guardians of the Globe, resulting in a dramatic fight. Before the events of the crossover, Mark decides to apologize to Oliver for being too hard on him and acknowledges the need to take more responsibility. As Oliver contemplates, he notices a reflection in a nearby tree, an orb. Mark reacts swiftly, grabbing the orb before it unexpectedly explodes. It becomes evident that someone was watching them through the orb. Undeterred by the explosion, Mark takes the remains of the orb to Robot for inspection. Robot inspects the remains of the device that Invincible brought. Robot decided that the device was meant to spy on Invincible and his family. After hearing the news, Invincible suspects Cecil, given his past actions.
Just wait. You've been spying on me? On my family? No,
and flies off to the United States Pentagon. Invincible started beating up the Reaniman. Cecil was surprised to see Invincible and teleported to the location. Invincible stops after Cecil makes his appearance. Cecil claims he had nothing to do with the device that was captured by Invincible and his teammates. Eventually, Invincible calms down and is asked for a favor by Cecil and his comrade to help capture a Wolfman who murdered his wife in cold blood and abandoned his daughter, ruining her life. Somewhere else, the Elder, who looks much like Battle Beast, trains the Astounding Wolfman for the battles yet to come. Soon after, Gary transforms into his wolf form and jumps off into the forest. Back at the Pentagon, Invincible is asked to take out the Astounding Wolfman. Mark refuses at first, making it clear he dislikes and does not trust Cecil, but Cecil tells him he will have his team look into the device. Mark doesn't like the offer because he believes no one is smarter than Robot on his staff. A problem arises when the giant escapes and begins to rampage in the same location that Wolfman was last seen. This gives Mark the opportunity to take out two birds with one stone. In the forest, Gary, the Wolfman, battles the giant, wrecking down the entire forest. In the midst of the battle, Gary almost gets crushed, and Invincible flies in and knocks the giant right in the back of his head and catches Gary. When the giant started to rise from the ground, Mark knocked him off of his feet and put him down for good. Soon, the response team arrives and captures the giant creature. It is later revealed that the giant was just a kid who was pulled into another dimension and genetically altered.
I'm the giant! And I want to be president of America! And an astronaut!
Eventually, Invincible stated that he still had to turn over Gary to Cecil at the Pentagon. After hearing that, Gary leaps into the air, only to be punched back to the ground by Invincible. Gary tries to explain that he did not kill his wife and that he is innocent. Gary then returns to his human form to prove his point about him being not guilty. He explains to Invincible that he saw his mentor, Zechariah, trying to drink her blood. He murdered her because he told him he was through working with him. Soon after, they returned to the Pentagon. In the White Room, Invincible tried to tell Cecil what truly happened that night when Gary's wife was killed. Despite Gary's innocence, Cecil, unwilling to listen because the Wolfman story is too public and can't have him running around. Invincible argues that Gary is a good person and won't allow Cecil to arrest him. Cecil, knowing Invincible too well, already planned ahead, calls out the Reaniman to attack Invincible and Gary. They teamed up to fight off the Reaniman, but they were outnumbered, and they decided to find an opening instead of fighting their way out. Eventually, they found an opening, and Invincible flew away with Gary. Gary thanks Invincible for helping him escape. Before the conversation could end, they were shot down by the Guardians of the Globe. They told Invincible Cecil sent them, that he wouldn't let them escape. The Immortal leads the charge and says that Mark is in big trouble for protecting a murderer. Mark noticed Darkwing among the Guardians, who he thought was still in prison for murder. Darkwing argues that Mark has killed people too. The duo commences fighting with the Guardians, and Gary manages to dodge a punch from Black Samson. Mark lands on Immortal, and Shapesmith ambushes him. Mark strikes back. Darkwing attempts to pull Gary into the Shadowverse, but Mark grabs him, only to be ambushed by Immortal. Mark becomes angry and says that he is sick of holding back. Mark flies towards Immortal, grabs his head, swings his body, and knocks out the entire Guardians team. He throws Immortal and escapes with Gary. Gary apologizes, and Mark argues that Cecil will likely need him since he is most likely his best bet in keeping the planet alive. Mark takes him to the Hampton estate, where he tells the story of how his daughter saw him holding his wife's body, making her believe that he killed her. With a cold fury in his eyes, Gary vowed to hunt down Zechariah and end his life. Dunford interrupts, and Gary introduces him to Mark. Dunford reveals that Gary's daughter's grades have dropped since the incident, and she hasn't opened up. As Gary reflected on Dunford's warnings about Zechariah, he realized that he should have listened, but Dunford reassured him that it wasn't his fault. With renewed determination, Gary promised to do right by his daughter and asked Mark to take him back to the forest. With a quick farewell, Mark said he had to go home to his girlfriend, who must be worried by now. The elder asks who Mark is, and Gary simply replies that he is something he thought he might never have again, a friend. Back at the Pentagon, Cecil finds a location on Gary, and Agent Hunter asks if he wants him to go in. Cecil says no, stating that he will be kept under surveillance and that he may have use for him.